Hello and welcome to the Middle East Report. In this program today, we'll be discussing the challenges facing Israeli and Jewish university students at our universities with the growing rise of anti-Semitism. Plus also we'll be discussing the problem of the BDS and countering those lies. Warm welcome to the programme, and have a special lineup of guests all the way from Israel today. And my first guest is Ben-Dror Yemi from Yediot Aharonot, one of the most popular, well-read newspapers in Israel, and probably one of the most distinguished journalists in Israel. So Ben-Dror, welcome to the programme. And I'm also joined by Major Amit Deri, who represents co-reservists on duty. So welcome to the programme. I'll first off start with you, Ben-Dror. Can you share something about your background? Because you are one of the most prominent journalists in Israel. You write for Yediot Aharonot. You've published a book in Israel called The Publication of Lies, which is coming out in English soon. I look forward to reading it. But can you share where your passion for truth and your passion for Israel stem from?
Well, it all began because I was actually a peace activist for many years, during the 80s and during the 90s. And during the conferences, meetings with a lot of activists, peace activists, and Palestinians, the leadership. I went all the way to Tunisia in order to meet Yasser Arafat, the leader of the Palestinians, even before Oslo. And during the time, I heard so many lies about Israel. And in a way, I lived in a kind of denial, because I gave excuses. Well, you know, they suffered. Well, they're fighting for their liberation. I cannot tell you what was exactly the turning point. Maybe it was after they rejected, the Palestinians rejected the Clinton proposal. Peace, 2 states for 2 peoples. Have it, take it, please. Do something for your own. And they refused, because actually, and then slowly by slowly, I began to understand that we are speaking here about totally a different story. I mean, they do not want to do something for themselves. I'm pro-Palestinian. I am pro-Palestinian. I don't want them to suffer. I want them to prosper. They don't want it, unfortunately. They want to keep on the war against Israel. They want the destruction of Israel. And all of these BDS activists, we will speak about them later, they are not striving for peace. They are not striving for 2 states for 2 peoples. They are not striving for reconciliation. They are striving only for one thing, which is the destruction of Israel, war, violence. That's what they are supporting. But I went deeper to this issue when I read so many publications by academics and by journalists saying so many lies against Israel. The genocide that Israel is committing, for example. What genocide? What are you talking about? How many Palestinians were killed? People don't know. People are misinformed, people are disinformed, people are ill-informed, and they begin to believe. When you repeat a lie 1,000 times, people begin to believe it. And they do believe that Israel is committing endlessly crimes against humanity. It's not true. I mean, in my book, The Industry of Lies, I refute it. I mean, I'm checking each argument against Israel in a very factual way. It's not my political views. It has nothing to do with political views. I'm just checking it, and I refute the so many lies about the apartheid state, There was never any kind of apartheid.
Absolutely.
About the crimes, there was not. I mean, what are you talking about? About the genocide, it never happened, and so on and so on and so on. So many lies, and the lies do not promote peace. The BDS is not promoting peace. They are promoting hatred. The outcome is not only against Israel, the outcome is against the free world, and we have to understand it, because many times people think that if they will support the BDS, they are supporting a kind of a non-violent movement. Not at all. What you are supporting actually is the jihad, because that's what they are, a kind of jihad that is operating in the universities, here in the West, here in Britain, here in the free world. And that's what led me. Not because Israel is perfect, not because I'm against peace. I'm pro-peace, I'm pro-Palestinian, I'm pro-Israel. And because I think that lies should be exposed, lies should be refuted, that's why I'm dedicating a large part of my work to exposing and refuting the lies.
Such an important work, Ben-Dror, so thank you so much for what you're doing. And I have to ask you, Major Amit Dori, can you give something about your background? What was life like for you serving in the I.D.F. as a major? You're still a reservist, I know.
Yeah, so I've been to the Army. I served for 10 years. I've been a company commander. The lies and the blood libels that Ben-Dror talked about, I saw it in my own eyes during my service. You know, you're watching TV, you're hearing people talking about what Israel is doing, what the I.D.F. is doing. And I was there. I was there in Kasled, I was there in Protective Edge, I was there during those big operations, and I saw it in my own eyes. And during that time, I thought to myself, wow, we are doing everything to avoid civilian casualties. I'll give just one example from the Operation Kasled that I participated as a company commander. And before we got into Gaza, we did, you know, pamphlets from the million of pamphlets. The minute we got into Gaza, we stepped off millions of pamphlets saying the civilians were to evacuate themselves. And knock on the roof bombs. Like each and every house that we wanted to get in, and we wanted to bomb it, there is a knock on the roof bomb, 5 minutes, you have the time for the people who are not combat soldiers, Hamas combat soldiers, to evacuate themselves, and then you can bomb this house. And like phone calls to every house next to the border with Gaza. We did everything to avoid the civilian casualties. I don't think there is an army all over the world that doing what the I.D.F. is doing to avoid those casualties. And when when that operation ended, you know, you open the TV and you see Israel is killing innocent people. Israel is doing this and that. And I thought to myself, the minute I will quit the army, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go out there and speak and tell the soldier story. So that's the reason we founded the Reservist on Duty group. It's a group of soldiers, actually, combat soldiers, officers, male and female. And the goal is to fight with activism, with real activism, mostly on college campuses in the United States and here in Britain. You know, to refute those lies and to bring the real story to the people. Out there, you will find, you know, 10% of the people are the people that Ben-Dror talked about, you know, the bad people. The people who are spreading the blind labels, the people who are lying, spreading the misinformation and disinformation. And you have the 10% of the people, like I want to believe this is our group, who are bringing the real story, the truth. And in the middle, you have 80%, you know, of people lack of knowledge or ignorant people about what's going on in the Middle East. You know, most of them do not know. I just came back from the States. Most of them do not know where, to point where is Israel is on the map, where is the Middle East is on the map. And we're trying to get to those 80%, to get their attention, to get their eyes and ear, to hear our story.
Excellent. Well, I can guarantee you our viewers know exactly where Israel is on the map. And I have to ask you, Amit, you know, during, say, military conflict like Operation Cast Lead in Gaza, which was Israel's defensive war in response to the rockets and missiles being fired out by Hamas on Israeli civilians, which wasn't presented in the mainstream news, that 2/3 of all Israelis were under the influence of those rockets and missiles and had literally seconds to run to bomb shelters, which, if you're in that situation, become intolerable for anyone living there. Of course, we then discovered the terror tunnels as well, which would have been horrific had Hamas implemented their plan to kidnap Israeli women and children on the villages and the kibbutzim next to Gaza. But it's a case, isn't it, where, for example, Israel does everything she can to prevent civilian casualties, but the major problem is that Hamas doesn't play to those rules. They don't apply the Geneva Convention, and instead they use civilians as human shields, and effectively Israel is fighting an asymmetrical warfare where Hamas play incredibly dirty. How do we convince the world, and particularly journalists and the media, to not fall into the trap of Hamas by saying that Israeli soldiers are killing innocent civilians when they won't actually report the truth of the situation that you face as a major?
The Hamas know the rules of the game. He understands the rules of the game, and he know that we will not gonna shoot, houses where there is civilians. We will not gonna shoot where there is a lot of, children's and women's, and they understand the rules of the games, and they are using their own people as human shields during that war. And they're also smart, and they know during wartime not to let the journalists to get to the right places. Like in Protective Edge, they uses even UN infrastructures to launch rockets on Israel. I saw it in my own eyes.
What do you mean? The UN published a report about how the Hamas is using schools in order to launch rockets. I mean, it's not the Israeli propaganda. Now it's an official document of the UN. Just one example, but there are many examples how they are using centers of civilian population in order to launch rockets. And then they are, we were hurt. I mean, don't use innocent civilians. Don't use children.
Absolutely.
By the way, why do we need, let's go to the first place. Why do we need this war at all? Israel is offering you, the EU is offering you, Britain is offering you prosperity. Just stop the fire, don't launch rockets. The EU presented 3 preconditions in order to stop the closure and in order to give them money, to invest money for their own benefit. They refused, and people don't understand it. People ask why Israel is imposing a kind of closure. It's not because Israel really wants to impose any kind of closure. It's because they refuse to the international community conditions, because that's the story of the global jihad. Can you ask ISIS and Daesh, whatever you call it here, why do you do it to your own people? Why do you mass killing innocent civilians, Muslims? Why? We are sometimes looking to understand what they are doing. We cannot really understand in our way of thinking why the Boko Haram in Nigeria is killing so many Muslims. They are not looking for prosperity. Unfortunately, I wish they did. I don't want the inhabitants of the Gaza Strip to suffer. I don't want. As a human being, I don't want them to suffer. But they are not suffering because of Israel. They are suffering because they are under the rule of the global jihad, which Hamas is part of it.
I think they also understand very well the rules of the media, the Western media. When they speak in English or they speak in Arabic, it's very different, very, very different. And they know how to speak to the Western media. I think our activism, I'll give you just an example, our activism on college campuses is just about that. Because on college campuses in the US, they managed, it's a sad and a funny thing, they managed to gather, the BDS and those hate groups against Israel, they managed to gather the LGBT groups, and they managed to gather the feminists, and they manage to gather, you know, minorities or even Christians around them. But when we are coming to college campuses and we are presenting our exhibitions to show those 80% that I talked about, to show those groups that they manage to gather with them, how they treat, we don't speak about Israel, how they treat their own people, how they treat, you know, you've got section of religion tolerance, how they treat Christians. You have a section of LGBT groups, how they treat LGBT groups on Gaza, on Judea and Samaria, how they treat women. You're a feminist, you want to support this cause, the Palestinian cause, or the Palestinian leadership? I just want you to know how they treat women. If you want to support, you know, you want to support the Palestinians, I want you to know if you are a gay or lesbian, I just want you to know they're throwing those people from rooftops. So when you presenting what they say, the official media, the official leadership saying about those groups, it really works. It really works for those 80% when they come and they see it for the first time how they educate, the Palestinians educate small children to stab, like a 5-year-old boy, how to stab Jews in the street with a knife in his hands. It's something that it's shocking for the students. And for the first time they could see, all right, I don't want to be part of this. It's not my values. It's not the, you know, it's not the freedom of speech. It's not the freedom of religion. That's not the way you educate children. So I think, again, when you see how they speak in Arabic, you see their media, you see their official statement of their leaderships, it's something different. And that's what we need to do. We have to take what they say in Arabic. We have to take what they do actually to their own people and put it all over the place. That's how we have to fight, I think, with Hamas and the terrorist groups.
And Ben-Dror, can you explain to us, particularly over the last, I don't know, really since 2000 in particular with the start of the Second Intifada, that this hatred has been growing on university campuses throughout the Western world against Israel and against Israeli and Jewish students. Can you explain why we're seeing such an attack on Jewish students on university campuses right across the Western world?
It is quite sad. I mean, the main story is that unfortunately there is not a real distinction. There is not a real distinction between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. Maybe there was once, maybe some people are telling you, well, we are not against Jews, but we are against Israel. And then you ask them, why you are against Israel? Because we are against nation states. Ooh, very nice, you are against nation state. Tell me something, are you against the Czech Republic, which is a nation state? Did you ever demonstrate against them? Did you ever? And then you find out that they are actually lying. They are not against nation states. They are against only one state on earth. They are against the very existence of Israel as the Jewish state or the self-determination for the Jewish people. They are against it. They are not against any other state. Which means that they are not, I mean, it's not that they are against the occupation. They are not against, they are not against anything of that kind. They are against the very existence of Israel. I mean, from all countries of the world, what they do again and again is to single out Israel and to demonize Israel. And they have an excuse. We are not against Jews, we are against Israel. No, it's a lie. Because you do to Israel exactly. You follow the same patterns of anti-Semitism. As Jews were demonized in the 30s, you are demonizing now Israel. It's not about peace. It's not about human rights. It's about being against the very existence of Israel. And many people here in the academia, unfortunately, are cooperating. Unfortunately, many times, they even lead this kind of industry of lies. They are lying. When they, for example, single out the Nakba, the Palestinian catastrophe that happened in 48, as they called it, the Nakba, they don't tell their students, look, in that time, In every conflict, there was a kind of population exchange. People were transferred. It happened in Europe, more than 20 million. It happened in Asia, so many millions. Altogether, in my book, in my research, about 60 million people were forced out of their homelands in order to establish nation states. There is nothing special about what happened to the Palestinians, and mainly when you remember that a bigger number of Jews were forced out from Arab countries.
Absolutely.
They don't care about it. They don't teach it. They manipulate their students. Why are they doing it? Because it's a part of a trend. Because, in the 60s, professors and students had this kind of Che Guevara T-shirts. But he was not a human rights activist, but they admired him. He was against homosexuals, but they admired him. It's the same now. They are supporting the same kind of movements, the most terrible movements, like the Hamas and like the others. Unfortunately, it happened in history and it's repeating itself.
So let's have a look now at the growing problem of anti-Semitism at our universities.
I would have never said a year ago that this would happen on my campus. 30-something% Jews, proud Jews, Zionists, such strong Jewish and Israel community, pro-Israel communities. This would never happen. It happened. People were being, verbally, maliciously attacked for saying, I believe in the right to a state of Israel. The anti-Israel sentiment has only escalated. The campus is going to become more and more polarized.
Things have just gotten a lot crazier and more negative on campus.
The negativity and the loudness, the abrasiveness on campus make it difficult for me to be open about supporting Israel.
A lot of students feel harassed and uncomfortable in their own living situation.
I don't think it's acceptable criticism of Israel when Israel becomes villainized, when Israel becomes the big bad devil.
You see these pamphlets that depict Jews with hooked noses and sucking children's blood, and I think that is classic anti-Semitism.
Students for Justice in Palestine hold an event called Israel Apartheid Week, where they lie about Israel for a week in a way that demonizes the state of Israel.
There's people who are pretending to be soldiers at checkpoints.
Filthy Arab, an Israeli life is worth more than all of you combined.
They were having a die-in, which is students lying, kind of pretending to be dead in the middle of campus. They're kind of trying to intimidate and frighten people on campus.
If we just look at the issues that people are focusing on, human rights issues in general, these are issues that are not even on par with the human rights violations that are happening in so many other places in the world.
The vote of 20 to 12 to 1 that passes.
Pro-Israel students who spoke at the Central Student Government vote faced threats from various groups.
All of these disparaging insults, accompanied by threats of violence, are messages that I and other members of Central Student Government have been receiving this past week.
Students were also called dirty Jews, things like this. Especially those on Central Student Government were called on the phone saying, we know where you live, like vote with us or else.
To say that this is a non-violent, peaceful movement, I would seriously disagree, especially with the number of emails and harassing texts and harassing voicemails and harassing calls that have caused me to miss class for a week.
When there are times with high pressure, like during this divestment vote, students are definitely intimidated. A lot of the pro-Palestinian students were screaming and just very offensive towards the pro-Israel students who spoke at the meeting.
It's a little bit scary because I kind of never know how students will react to my pro-Israel sentiment. Even openly talking with other students on campus and professors especially.
So we can say this, and Hamas is a terrorist organization, sure. They also do great healthcare in kindergartens. But Hamas doesn't recognize Israel. So what?
You see it in Colombia, Saliba, Khalidi, Masad. They're all tenured professors, and they're all espousing their very anti-Israel and distorted views on the students.
As a student, the power dynamics are there. I feel powerless in a sense and very intimidated that these figures of authority and academic knowledge are basically invalidating everything I support.
They will stage a walkout, in some cases even curse at the speaker. They're notorious for doing this.
My only purpose today is that this event is shut down.
I.D.F speaks for Israeli apartheid. I.D.F speaks for Israeli apartheid. Genocide at the hands of the I.D.F.
It sounds like it was a very specific thing that happened nationally. They had their very specific scripts that they were reading from a piece of paper about how Noni Darwish supports Israeli apartheid. It's nationally organized. It's not something that students came up with at UNM.
They're not saying, let's have these borders. They're saying, let's have all of Israel gone. Israel has no right to exist.
From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free.
What it essentially means is that from the river, meaning the Jordan River, to the sea, meaning the Mediterranean Sea, Palestine will be free, meaning all of Israel, as it currently exists, will be dissolved, and in its place will be a Palestinian state.
Now that was some of the problems that Jewish and Israeli students face in the United States, but now let's have a look at some of the problems that Jewish and Israeli students faced here in the UK, and this is UCL London.
Society has done is they brought in a war criminal, someone who's been a lieutenant in the I.D.F. in the West Bank, in the occupied West Bank, to come here and speak to UCL. And we as students of UCL will not stand for this. We will not have a war criminal come and speak at our university.
There's no dialogue with killers, there's no dialogue with soldiers, there's dialogue with academics, fair enough, and we're willing to have that debate, but don't bring killers onto my campus.
I don't think that even in my days in the I.D.F. it was as bad as it is right now. It's really scary. I hear that they've been attacking some girls, Jewish girls that came to support and to my talk, and it's, wow, it's crazy.
murder? Who did I murder?
I have absolutely no problem debating with students like me, but I will not debate with officials. I will not debate with ambassadors. I will not debate with anyone who represents the government of Israel, the fascist government that kills my people every single day.
Stop talking. Let's go home. Okay, thank you for talking to me.
Why didn't you go through the students' union? There's a nice bar. They sit down and everything. Come on, guys.
You're right, man. Yeah.
Come on, guys. Let's go.
Absolutely shocking. Who's looking at that? Where is the academic freedom of expression at universities? I have to ask you, Amit. I mean, I was shocked when I saw that, and I know that things and the situation is bad at our universities when it comes to Israel and Jewish communities, but that was just vile. Have you experienced anything like that yourself?
First, I think that's what we just saw now. It's the proof. The connection between the anti-Semitism and the BDS movement and those hate groups. Because it's not about criticizing Israel on a certain policy, on a certain, certain thing. It's just about anti-Semitism, because the attacks on Jewish students, just because they're Jewish, it's anti-Semitism. It's not about Israel. I just came from the States. We've been there last week. We went to Columbia University. And in Colombia, there is a rule that you cannot shout too much. You cannot interrupt other speakers when they come to the university. And I think it's the right thing to do. But in most universities, yes, you will experience, if they will know that you are coming. And by the way, that's another problem. A lot of Jewish events on college campuses, even here in the UK, our event, we've been here yesterday, Jewish events or Israeli speakers are not publishing the place where they're going to speak, just because they want to avoid that, violence. So, but yeah, on most college campuses, you will experience the SJP groups, like Students for Justice in Palestine and others, that will come to the event, and they will interrupt, mostly by, they will raise flags of Palestine, and they will say, yeah, you're a murderer, yeah, you are a Nazi, yeah, you are a fascist, and most of the time they will go away. Like they will stand up, they will say something, and they will go away. What we saw now, we just saw on UCL, it's a very violent one. But also in the US and California, you can find numerous examples of the same method of interrupting Israeli speakers.
Yeah. And Ben-Dror, isn't the issue of academic freedom of expression under threat? And this is a fundamental of our democracy here in the Western world.
First of all, we don't have any freedom of expression, because actually every Israeli speaker is in one way or another is barred. Yeah. They don't let him speak. Sometimes it happens behind the scenes, because they don't even invite him. You can find many panels in this Middle Eastern faculties. They don't invite Israelis. So you don't hear the other side. How can you speak on behalf of freedom of speech when you don't even let the Israelis speak? And when they are invited by pro-Israeli groups, we see what is happening. And unfortunately, this kind of things that we just saw, it's repeating itself in many universities in the Western world. You cannot speak if you want to say the truth, if you want to say, sorry, I'm pro-peace, I'm pro-Israeli, I'm pro-Palestinian, I want reconciliation. You cannot even say it. You can only shout, we want to destruct Israel, we want Palestine from the river to the sea, as we just heard. That's the BDS. It's a big success, by the way. It's a big success. But it's frightening, because we already had this kind of big success in the 30s. It is frightening, because what they are doing now to Israel is just the same of what people did to the Jews in the 30s. The same kind of patterns. I mean, we see it again and again. They are convinced that Israel is a monster. They are really convinced. They believe, by the way, what they are saying. They believe, just as people believe the Jews are a danger to humanity. That's what the Nazis said. Now they're saying Israel is a danger to humanity. And it's not only the jihad activists. It's the enlightened people, it's academics, it's professors. By the way, some of them Jews, anti-Israeli Jews, anti-Semite Jews even. It's a new phenomena, and it's frightening. We have to open our eyes, because it's not about peace. It's not about human rights. It's about destruction. It's about supporting the jihad. We have to face it.
Yeah. I think what Ben-Dror just said, that's the reason we establish reservists on duty, because we believe that only activism will work here. The formal events and the Israeli speakers who are coming to speak mostly for Jewish students, it's not enough. Their great success is because they are activists. Like if you go in most college campuses in the US, you have a week, the Israeli Apartheid Week. It's an exhibition, and we just saw it on the screen. Soldiers doing this and that for a week. That big apartheid wall, and that's if you are students in the Ivy League universities, that's what you will see and face for a whole week. So we believe we have to be there and do the same. Do like activism out in the campus, bring our own exhibition, presenting the other side for the students. And they are very smart. They know where to go. They are not out there in the streets, the BDS and the haters of Israel, those groups. They're going to places, college campuses, where you can plant ideas in people's mind. And that's the place to do that. And they're doing it, like Ben-Dror said, with great success. And that, I think, what the Jewish students and the supporters of Israel need to do, the same. If there is an Israeli Apartheid Week, so we are doing the Palestinian Values Week. And we want the students to understand this is the Palestinian leadership values. This is not our values. We don't want to be part of it.
Absolutely. And Ben-Dror, how must Jewish and Israeli students feel at universities if they feel that they cannot be protected? If they can't be identified as being Jewish, if they can't be proud to be associated with Israel and with Zionism, then surely some sort of legislation needs to be brought in here to protect Jewish students, also to protect academic freedom of expression, because if this goes, then there is no freedom at our universities.
Yeah, that's why I think it's not the problem of Israel. It's not the problem only of the Jews. It's the problem of the Western world. It's the problem of the free thought. We are losing it. We are losing it because of this kind of propaganda, which is not really freedom of speech. It's the power of some groups to oppress the freedom of speech. But you don't have to be a Jew. You don't have to be an Israeli in order to understand it. You have to be a decent human being in order to understand it, because the problem is a problem of Britain, because those people that are shouting and silencing other voices, they are going to do it here to their opponents. They are going to do it here. We have to understand it that the problem is not the problem of Israel. The problem is the problem of Britain. The problem is the problem of Belgium. The problem is the problem. We have a problem. Everyone who is enlightened, everyone who is looking for freedom of speech, everyone who is looking for human rights should be afraid from those people, should raise his voice against them. So many times, if you reduce it to a problem of Israelis or Jews, you give yourself an exemption from doing something against it, because it's not about us. It's just like, I can quote Sam Harris, the American philosopher, when he was asked once something about Israel, then he said, the whole free world is Israel, but some of us don't know it yet. And that's the point. The point is that every human being, I'm not expecting Jews to raise their voices. I'm expecting every decent person, human, to raise his voice against this kind of oppression. Because otherwise, London will be like Somalia. It might happen. It happened, by the way, in the 30s. We cannot say it will never happen again. It happened in history. It's not 1,000 years before. When people are brainwashed, they begin to believe. People were brainwashed in the 30s. People are brainwashed now.
And Amit, I have to really ask you, when it also comes down to universities and also becomes a hotbed for the BDS movement known as the boycott, divestments and sanctions, in which they effectively call for sanctions and boycotts against Israel, the boycott of Israeli produce and Israeli goods. And yet we see that when it actually comes into practice, like, for example, the famous Israeli company SodaStream had their factories actually in Judea and Samaria, and employed Palestinian workforce, gave them a higher salary than the Palestinian Authority ever could. I think it's 3 times the amount. But they had to close because of the pressure due to the BDS. Can you share with us how the BDS movement is actually hurting peace and not bringing peace and reconciliation between Israelis and Palestinians, and how their intention is to destroy Israel's moral standing in the world?
Yeah, again, they don't care about the Palestinian cause. You give the best example, SodaStream. They moved one of the factories to Israel, next to Beersheba. Now there is another workers. And hundreds of Palestinian workers will have the salary. They don't have it anymore. They cannot feed their children. So they're hurting actually the Palestinians themselves. And all over Judea and Samaria, you can find Palestinians working together with Israelis, together with people who live there, the Jews. And if you will go, you take a tour on Judea and Samaria, and you will ask the average Palestinian, what do you think? We need to boycott Israel, to boycott the Israeli products or not? I'm 100% sure they will tell you no, because they are working at the same factories. So this is one. And again, I think when you're supporting BDS, or you are BDS, you're actually supporting jihad. You're actually supporting the oppressions of women. You're supporting oppression of LGBT. You're supporting people who don't have a religion tolerance. And you're actually supporting the bad guys. So if that's what you do, it's you are supporting the Palestinian leadership to operate against its own people.
And Ben-Dror, isn't there a great danger now, particularly with the BDS movement, that this has been incorporated into policy, government policy, particularly if we look at the European Union, its publication of the EU guidelines in November of 2015, that first produced the guidelines in, I think, July 2013, effectively call for economic sanctions against Israeli goods and produce produced in Judea and Samaria, East Jerusalem, or the Golan Heights. Now, isn't there great danger that anti-Israel governments, and particularly that of the European Union, have embraced the BDS movement?
Yeah, there is a danger, and unfortunately, many politicians all around the EU are supporting this kind of measures against Israel. And yes, this is a success of the BDS. Now, the EU, we have to clarify, the EU formally is against the BDS as it is, because the BDS is not about settlements. The BDS is about Israel. The BDS is against the very existence of Israel, and not every supporter of the BDS know what does it mean to support the BDS. So, but a lot of diplomatic work is taking place, and I know that there are some changes even here in Britain. We know that the British government is decided lately not to fund some parts of the Palestinian Authority because of their support in funding terrorists and so on. Absolutely. Now, we are not only failing. I mean, let's not create the impression that more people know in the high ranks the nature of the activities of the BDS. I think that there is a beginning of a change. We are not only failing. I think you can find, not maybe in the Guardian and the Independent, but in other newspapers here in Britain, quite decent articles explaining the real situation. So it's not that everything is lost. Yes, we have a problem. in the universities and colleges. Yes, we do. But it doesn't mean that everyone is against Israel. And we have to reach out to the decent people. And you know what? Most Europeans are decent people. They don't know. When they are against Israel, many of them, when you give them the real facts, when you present them, here are the real facts, they change their mind. It's not lost. I'm not speaking about the activists. I'm speaking about decent people. Most of the people out there are decent people. You just have, we are not against peace. We are against this kind of BDS jihad school of thought. That's what we are. That's what we are doing. Not because we are against Palestinians. They perpetuate the problem. We do not want to perpetuate the problem. We want a decent solution that they rejected, by the way, again and again. Not Israel rejected all the peace initiatives. They rejected. The BDS is against any kind of decent solution. I mean, politically we can disagree about this or about that, but they are totally against any kind of reconciliation. We have to present the real facts. People don't know the real facts. People think that Israel is committing crimes. No, you are manipulated. No, look at the numbers. No, look at the reality. We just have to give the right information. It's not enough. There are many ways to work. I mean, what Amit and his NGO is doing, what other academics, but it is not lost. It is not lost. There are so many decent people out there. We have to reach out in order to change the atmosphere. We can do it. We are doing it.
Absolutely.
I think a good example of that from Colombia, I'll give you just one. There was a group of Muslims who came to the exhibition to speak with me. They started a conversation, a dialogue. And then came a couple of people from the SJP group, from the BDS. And what they do, they told to the Muslim group, don't speak with them. They are Israelis. Don't speak with them. And that's what they do. They don't want a solution. They don't want a dialogue. They don't want to negotiate. They want to stop and destroy Israel. Like they say, Palestine will be free from the river to the sea.
Which is an incitement to genocide. Yeah. Amit and Ben-Dror, we have less than 5 minutes to the programme, so I think we have to talk about how great Israel is and what an amazing country and nation Israel is. And can you share with us some of the ways that our viewers can counter the BDS movement, but also maybe even support Jewish and Israeli students at our universities?
You mean what we are doing?
Yeah. What we can do, what our viewers can do, those people watching the program.
I think if you're a student and you're seeing there is an Israeli or a Jewish event, go to the event, go to here, just to be there and to part of the event is something. It gives the students confidence that people care, that people want to know more, that people want to learn. This is a very easy step to do. And I think it's immense power to come and just sit and learn and hear about Israel. I think this is something that students, Jewish and non-Jewish, can do all together that can really help.
Yeah. I wanted to say just a few words about the real face of Israel that people ignore because we are speaking so much about BDS, conflict, Palestinians, Israelis. What are the real face of Israel? People don't know. For example, I conducted a kind of research, the contribution to humanity per capita. There is not any index like that. I mean, I created it. And what you find out that Israel is the leading state in the world in water rights regulation. That Israel is the leading state in the world in watering systems. That Israel is leading in manufacturing medicines and developing in research. That Israel is not what people think. Israel is the country that is contributing to humanity per capita more than any other country. I mean, look in so many greenhouses in Africa, the watering systems in Africa, using Israeli technologies. I mean, and people don't know it many times. This is the real Israel. Israel that is doing a kind of what we call tikkun olam, which is repairing the world, which is helping the world, which is doing something. We outreach to many people in the world, mainly in poor countries, with medicines, with watering systems, with desalination systems. That's what we do, actually. It's not about weapons. It's not about conflict. It's not about occupation. The opposite. The real Israel is something else. The real Israel. And people don't know it. And we have to say it. And we have to present it. Because people ignore it. Why? Because of the BDS. Why? Because they are speaking about the conflict. Why? Because they don't want any kind of reconciliation. We are looking for it. We are looking for it.
We're down to last minute and a half, so I have to ask you very, very briefly, Amit, isn't one of the key things to get young people, to university students, out to Israel to see Israel for themselves?
How to do it?
No, they should.
Again?
They should visit Israel. Young people should visit Israel and then get a real understanding of the truth. Gentlemen, we come to the end of the program, and just thank you so much for being my guests all the way from Israel, and thank you for enlightening us about the challenge Israel faces. So, but also we know that you know, the God of Israel is on Israel's side, and that Israel's cause is a righteous cause, and you have our complete support in advocating for the truth about Israel and the truth about the Jewish people.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure. And I just want to thank you for watching today's Middle East Report with these very special guests all the way from Israel. There is a battle with truth. There is a battle for truth at academia, and we have to counter the BDS. And the best way we can do that is by praying for Israel, for standing up for Israel, buying Israeli goods, and attending Israeli events. So we leave you with this beautiful song that shows you the beauty that is the modern state of Israel.
so no.